December settled over Charleston like a polished mask, hiding the rot beneath silk and candlelight. The house on Church Street gleamed from every angle, its windows glowing amber against the early dusk as carriages arrived one by one, wheels crunching over gravel with practiced elegance. Inside, servants moved quickly, rehearsed and silent, smoothing the last creases from tablecloths and lighting tapers in crystal holders. The master wanted perfection tonight. Christmas demanded it, reputation required it, and no one felt that pressure more keenly than the woman standing over the hearth in the kitchen, her hands already slick with sweat, though the evening had barely begun. The kitchen was the true heart of the house, though no one upstairs would have admitted it. Heat pressed against the walls, thick with the scent of roasting meat, sugar melting into syrup, cloves crushed beneath a pestle. Copper pots hung in careful rows, each one polished to reflect the firelight like a line of watchful eyes. The cook had arranged the day's work with precision born of long habit, every dish timed, every ingredient measured. She had learned to move this way because mistakes were punished, and because excellence, even when achieved, earned nothing but expectation. She had risen before dawn, as she always did, to begin the stocks and doughs that required hours of patient tending. By mid-morning, the kitchen had filled with noise and motion, younger girls scurrying at her command, older hands moving with practiced ease. The cook said little. She did not need to. Her authority existed only here, within these walls, and even then it was borrowed, conditional, revocable at any moment. Still the others listened. They knew her skill kept them fed, kept them alive. Upstairs, the mistress floated from room to room in a haze of excitement and nerves, issuing instructions that contradicted one another, her mind fixed on how the evening would be judged by those who mattered. She came down to the kitchen twice, skirts gathered delicately, as if the floor itself might stain her, to inquire about the menu. Each time she wrinkled her nose at the heat, the smells, the presence of labor made visible. Each time she found fault with something small, a garnish too simple, a sauce too dark, as though criticism were the only proof of her place in the world. The cook received these visits without expression. She had learned long ago that a still face was safer than an honest one. She answered politely, adjusted what needed adjusting, and returned to her work. Inside, memory stirred. She remembered other Christmases, other feasts prepared with the same care, other nights when laughter drifted down from above while the kitchen labored on in shadow. She remembered the master's voice raised in praise when guests admired the food, never once acknowledging the hands that made it. She remembered how praise flowed upward, never down. The menu for the ball was ambitious, designed to impress Charleston's finest. Turtle soup simmered slowly, rich and dark. Hams glazed with molasses and spice turned on spits, their skins crackling. Pies cooled along the counters, apple and pecan, their crusts flaky and precise. Cakes rose in the ovens, delicate and tall, while pudding steamed in cloth, heavy with fruit and brandy. The cook oversaw it all, tasting, correcting, ensuring balance. Her tongue was trained, her senses sharp. She could tell when a sauce needed salt before anyone else noticed, could smell the difference between perfect and ruined sugar. As the afternoon wore on, the house above grew louder. Musicians arrived, tuning violins and fiddles, their notes drifting down the stairwell in thin, hopeful threads. Footmen practiced their routes, trays balanced, steps counted. The master descended once, flushed with anticipation, to survey the preparations. He stood in the doorway, surveying the kitchen as if it were an extension of his own body, something he owned completely. "Tonight must be flawless," he said, his tone carrying the weight of command without effort. "Charleston will remember this." The cook nodded. She always did. She did not remind him that Charleston had remembered many nights like this, all built on her labor. She did not remind him that memory was selective, that it preserved chandeliers and music but erased sweat and burns. He lingered a moment, then turned away, satisfied that order reigned. When he left, the kitchen seemed to exhale. The younger girls exchanged glances, their eyes bright with nervous excitement. A Christmas ball was a rare chance to see the world upstairs, even if only through doorways and reflections. The cook watched them quietly. She had once been like them, curious, hopeful in small ways. Years had taught her the limits of that hope. As dusk deepened, the final preparations began. Dishes were plated, covered, kept warm. Sauces were strained one last time. Garnishes were placed with care. The cook's movements were calm, deliberate, though inside her thoughts churned. The day had unfolded exactly as she expected. The evening would too. And yet, beneath the familiar rhythm, something felt different, like a string pulled too tight. She moved to the pantry, checking the stores, ensuring nothing was missing. Shelves lined with jars and bottles greeted her, labels written in her own careful hand. She knew this room intimately. She knew which jars held spices and which held remedies, which powders soothed and which harmed. Knowledge, like her skill, had been acquired quietly, over time, without permission. She had paid attention because attention was survival. From the ballroom above came the first swell of applause as guests arrived, greeted by the master's booming laugh. Music followed, bright and confident. The cook paused, listening. She could almost picture it, the women in silk and lace, the men in tailored coats, the glasses raised, the compliments exchanged. She imagined their faces as they tasted her food, nodding in approval, praising the household's refinement. She imagined how none of them would think about the kitchen beyond the pleasure it provided. A younger girl entered the pantry, breathless, to announce that the first course would be needed soon. The cook nodded, sent her back, and remained where she was for a moment longer. She rested her hand on the shelf, feeling the cool wood beneath her palm. Her breathing slowed. Whatever decision lived within her did not arrive in a rush. It settled, heavy and certain, like a pot placed on a fire that had been burning all along. She returned to the kitchen, issuing instructions, her voice steady. The first trays were assembled and carried upstairs, the doors swinging closed behind them. One by one the courses followed. The cook watched each departure, marking time not by clocks, but by absence. The kitchen grew quieter as the work shifted from preparation to waiting. Fires were banked, dishes wiped, surfaces cleaned. The cook remained alert, listening to the sounds from above. Laughter swelled and ebbed, toasts were made, glasses clinked. The master's voice rose in a speech full of pride and gratitude, praising tradition, prosperity, and the blessings of the season. The cook heard his words clearly, each one carrying irony she doubted he could ever perceive. Blessings, he said, as if they were evenly distributed. As the main courses were served, the kitchen stood nearly empty. Only the cook remained, along with one older woman dozing on a stool. The cook moved quietly, checking the last pots, ensuring nothing burned. She felt a strange calm settle over her, the kind that comes when a long-anticipated moment draws near. Fear was present, but it no longer ruled her. Years of endurance had reshaped her understanding of danger. Some risks, she knew, were already built into existence. She washed her hands carefully. Scar. Ubbing beneath her nails, rinsing thoroughly. Cleanliness had always been demanded of her, enforced with lectures and punishment. Tonight, she embraced it fully, her movements precise. She dried her hands, folded the cloth neatly, and placed it aside. The kitchen clock ticked softly, marking the passage of time. From above came the sound of dancing, the floorboards thudding in rhythm. The cook stood still, listening. Each beat echoed through her chest. She thought of the long path that had led her here, of the countless small humiliations, the words swallowed, the injuries ignored. She thought of the knowledge she carried, the skills honed not just for service but for survival. She thought of how power assumed obedience would last forever. When the signal came for the final course, she moved without hesitation. The dessert trays were assembled, each plate a careful balance of sweetness and presentation. The cook oversaw their departure, watching as they vanished up the stairs, carried toward candlelight and applause. She did not follow. She remained in the kitchen, standing by the hearth, listening as the house consumed what it had demanded. The first faint shift in sound from above was easy to miss. A pause in laughter, a note of confusion. The cook noticed it immediately. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, her expression unchanged. Whatever happened next would happen beyond her sight. The kitchen had done its work. The storm, long gathering beneath polished surfaces, had been set in motion. She stood there, alone with the dying fire, as Charleston celebrated upstairs, unaware that the night they would remember forever had already begun. The ballroom glowed like a dream fashioned from glass and fire. Candles multiplied themselves in mirrors, turning every surface into a trembling constellation. Silk skirts whispered across polished floors, and boots apt in time to the music, as if the night itself had learned the steps. The master stood near the center of it all, receiving congratulations with practiced warmth, his hand firm on every shoulder, his smile wide and untroubled. This was the Charleston he believed in, orderly, admiring, convinced of its own permanence. Servants moved through the room with trays balanced precisely, their paths memorized, their faces carefully blank. They appeared and vanished without comment, the choreography of service perfected through repetition. No one asked their names, no one needed to. The food arrived as if by magic, steaming and fragrant, arranged in patterns that pleased the eye before they ever touched the tongue. Compliments began almost immediately, murmured appreciatively, then spoken aloud with growing enthusiasm. The turtle soup drew nods. The ham earned laughter and praise. Guests leaned closer to one another, pleased to be pleased. From the threshold near the stairs, the cook watched. She had been permitted to stand there under the guise of supervision, a silent sentinel ensuring the courses flowed without interruption. Her presence went largely unnoticed, absorbed into the background of abundance. She saw everything, the way guests closed their eyes briefly at the first taste, the way hands gestured with forks as praise spilled out, the way the master straightened slightly with each compliment, ownership settling comfortably across his shoulders. Conversation rose and fell like a tide. Politics, trade, marriages, and rumors wove together in bright, careless strands. Someone joked about the difficulty of finding reliable help these days, drawing laughter that carried a sharp edge. Another spoke warmly of tradition, of Christmas as a time for gratitude and harmony. Glasses were raised repeatedly, toasting prosperity, family, the city itself. The words floated easily, through the air, unburdened by reflection. The cook listened without expression. She had heard these sentiments before, always spoken as if they were universal truths rather than privileges carefully guarded. Gratitude, she knew, was expected from some and optional for others. Harmony existed so long as certain voices remained unheard. She watched the guests consume what had been prepared with her skill, her attention, her intimate knowledge of balance and timing. She felt no triumph in their enjoyment, only a distant awareness that the moment was unfolding exactly as she had anticipated. As the night progressed, the room grew warmer, bodies packed closer together as the dancing intensified. Music swelled, violins soaring joyfully, a fiddle urging feet faster. Laughter came more easily now, loosened by drink and celebration. Plates were cleared, replaced, cleared again. The servants moved faster, adjusting to the energy of the room, their steps careful not to disrupt the illusion of effortless abundance. The first sign of unease passed almost unnoticed. A guest near the windows paused mid-sentence, pressing a hand briefly to his chest, as if catching his breath. He laughed it off, blaming excitement, the heat, the wine. Others nodded sympathetically, returning quickly to their conversations. The cook observed this exchange closely, her gaze sharp but her face unchanged. The room absorbed the moment and moved on. More subtle shifts followed. A woman fanned herself more vigorously than before, her smile tightening. Another guest set down his glass unfinished, his brow furrowed in mild confusion. These were small things, easily dismissed amid the noise and motion. The master noticed none of it. He was engaged in conversation near the musicians, his voice carrying confidently as he recounted a recent business success. Dessert arrived to fresh applause. The tables were reset, gleaming under candlelight, and the final course was greeted with renewed enthusiasm. Sugar and spice softened the room, sweetening tempers already buoyant. Compliments reached their peak now, voices overlapping in praise not just of the food, but of the household itself. Someone declared it the finest Christmas ball Charleston had seen in years. The master accepted the accolade with a bow, his satisfaction complete. The cook felt the shift more distinctly now. The air itself seemed to tighten, as if holding something back. She watched as one guest set down her fork, her smile faltering. Another leaned toward a companion, whispering something urgent. Laughter began to thin at the edges, replaced by questions asked quietly, then repeated with growing concern. A chair scraped loudly against the floor as a man stood too quickly, knocking into a nearby table. Wine sloshed, staining linen. The music faltered for a beat, the musicians glancing at one another in confusion before continuing, uncertain whether to stop. The master turned at the noise, irritation flickering across his face before smoothing back into charm. He gestured reassuringly, making a joke, urging everyone to relax. But the room was no longer listening. A woman near the far wall sank back into her chair, her fan slipping from her fingers. Someone called her name sharply. Another guest laughed nervously, the sound too loud, too brittle. The servants hesitated, their practiced rhythm disrupted by the unfamiliar. They looked toward the master for guidance, their eyes betraying alarm. The cook remained where she was, observing. She did not move to intervene, did not call out. Her role, as always, was to be present and unseen. The knowledge that something irrevocable had begun settled into her bones with surprising calm. She had spent her life anticipating others' needs, predicting outcomes before they arrived. This moment was no different. The music stopped abruptly as a man stumbled, clutching at the table to keep his balance. His glass shattered on the floor, the sharp sound cutting through the murmurs like a blade. Voices rose now, overlapping in confusion and fear. Chairs scraped back as people stood, some reaching for doors, others bending toward those who had fallen silent. The master pushed his way through the gathering crowd, his expression darkening as he took in the scene. He called for water, for air, for someone to explain what was happening. His authority, so effortless moments before, now sounded strained, brittle under pressure. No explanation came. The room offered only evidence, pale faces, trembling hands, the sudden weight of panic. Servants hurried forward, uncertain whether to help or retreat. Some froze where they stood, caught between duty and self-preservation. Others obeyed instinct, moving toward the doors, seeking escape from a situation that defied understanding. The cook watched these reactions with detached clarity. Chaos revealed character more honestly than comfort ever could. The first scream tore through the room without warning, raw and piercing. It galvanized the remaining hesitation into action. Guests surged toward the exits, calling names, tripping over one another in their haste. The master shouted orders that no one heard. The carefully arranged world he had curated for this night collapsed in on itself, undone not by external force but by something woven quietly into its center. Amid the confusion, the cook slipped away from the threshold. Her movements were unhurried, precise. She navigated the corridors she knew so well, the sounds of panic receding behind her as she descended the back stairs. The kitchen greeted her with familiar stillness, the hearth glowing softly, the scent of sugar lingering in the air. It felt almost peaceful, a stark contrast to the turmoil above. She paused only briefly, listening. The house vibrated with shouts now, doors slamming, feet pounding. Somewhere bells rang, summoning help, summoning authority. The cook took in the scene one last time, the tools of her trade laid out neatly, the surfaces wiped clean, the fires banked low. Everything appeared exactly as it should. Appearances she knew were powerful things. She did not linger. Moving through the servants' passage, she slipped into the yard, where the night air struck her skin like a revelation. Cold and sharp, it cleared her senses. She moved quickly now, blending into the darkness, her path guided by memory and necessity. Behind her, the house continued to unravel, its polished facade cracking audibly under the weight of fear. Charleston would wake to questions and rumors by morning. The Christmas ball would be spoken of in hushed tones, its elegance overshadowed by disaster. But for now, the night belonged to confusion, to the sudden realization that control was more fragile than anyone upstairs had believed. The cook disappeared into the city's shadows, carrying with her the knowledge that the feast of appearances had consumed itself, leaving nothing but uncertainty in its wake. Night did not soften the chaos, it sharpened it. Charleston's streets, usually hushed after midnight, throbbed with urgent movement as lanterns bobbed and doors flew open. The Christmas ball that had promised elegance dissolved into a citywide disturbance, and by the time the church bells began ringing out of rhythm, panic had already outrun reason. Neighbors leaned from windows in nightclothes, calling to one another for scraps of understanding. Carriages rattled past at reckless speed, wheels splashing through puddles, left by hurried buckets of water thrown onto cobblestones slick with frost. Inside the house, in Church Street, the ballroom no longer resembled a place of celebration. Candles guttered, wax pooling onto the floor like tears, their light revealing faces drained of color and contorted with fear. Guests lay sprawled where they had fallen, others slumped into chairs, breathing shallow and uneven. The air was thick with the metallic tang of spilled wine and the sour edge of sickness. Servants clustered uncertainly along the walls, their training offering no guidance for a world that had broken its rules. The master moved among the stricken with frantic purpose, his voice hoarse as he shouted orders that collided and collapsed under their own weight. He demanded doctors, then cursed them for not arriving faster. He demanded explanations from servants who had none to give. The authority that had once steadied the room now ricocheted uselessly, stripped of its magic. His hands trembled as he knelt beside a guest who no longer responded to his voice, the reality of the night pressing in on him with suffocating force. Doctors arrived in a flurry of black coats and breathless urgency, their bags clutched tightly as if ritual alone might restore order. They moved from body to body, murmuring in low tones, exchanging glances heavy with concern. They spoke of symptoms and timing, of shared meals and sudden collapse. The word no one wanted to say formed unspoken in the room, hovering like a curse. Poison. It crept through the space without sound, settling into minds already primed for fear. Outside, the yard filled with officials and onlookers. Lantern light cut sharp lines across faces as questions flew faster than answers. Who had fallen first? What had they eaten? Who had served them? The master's voice rose above the clamor as he insisted on swift justice, his grief transforming into fury with alarming ease. The night demanded a culprit, someone to bear the weight of. Collective horror. The kitchen, when finally inspected, offered no immediate clarity. Pots sat cold, surfaces wiped clean, the evidence of labor rendered invisible by habit and thoroughness. Servants were questioned one by one, their answers halting, cautious. Some trembled openly, others stared at the floor, their silence interpreted as guilt or ignorance, depending on the listener's mood. The absence of the cook did not go unnoticed for long. Her name passed from mouth to mouth, first tentatively, then with increasing certainty. The cook who had overseen every dish, who knew the pantry better than anyone, who had vanished just as chaos erupted. Suspicion congealed quickly, fueled by fear and the city's long-held assumptions. By dawn, the narrative had begun to settle into something palatable, something that restored the illusion of order, a singular act by a singular person severed from context. Charleston woke uneasy. The morning sun revealed streets strewn with the remnants of the night's turmoil. Discarded gloves, broken glass, the tracks of hurried wheels. Shops opened late, if at all, their owners drawn instead to doorways where rumors could be exchanged. News traveled without need of print, carried by voices sharpened by shock. The Christmas ball became a cautionary tale before noon, retold with embellishments that grew with each telling. The cook moved through this waking city like a ghost. She kept to alleys and narrow lanes, her pace steady, her mind clear. She did not flee blindly. Every step followed paths she had memorized over years of necessity, routes that avoided patrols and passed through places where questions were not asked. The city had taught her how to be unseen. Now she applied that lesson fully. But Charleston was small in its vigilance when roused. By midday, patrols intensified, their presence marked by boots and clipped commands. Notic. As were prepared, descriptions hastily agreed upon. The cook felt the net tightening, not as panic but as inevitability. She understood how stories worked here. She understood that once named, she would be found. She was taken in the early afternoon, not in flight but in stillness, paused beneath the shade of a narrow awning as if considering her next step. The deputies approached cautiously, their hands firm on their weapons, their eyes searching her face for signs of threat. They found none. She surrendered without resistance, her expression composed, her gaze steady. The lack of struggle unsettled them more than any attempt to run might have. As she was led through the streets, people gathered in clusters, drawn by curiosity and a need to see the source of their fear. Faces pressed close, voices hissed accusations, prayers, curses. Some recognized her, others knew her only as a role suddenly magnified into infamy. She walked without hurry, her posture straight, her silence unbroken. Whatever explanations they demanded, she did not provide. Interrogation followed, conducted in a room heavy with stale air and expectation. Questions came fast, layered and repetitive, as if repetition itself might force confession. Where had she gone? What had she done? Why? She answered sparingly, acknowledging her presence in the kitchen, her role in the preparations. She did not elaborate. The men across from her exchanged looks, frustrated by her composure. They wanted remorse or defiance, some emotional sign they could translate into certainty. She offered neither. Evidence was circumstantial but persuasive enough for a city desperate to move forward. The shared meal, the timing, her access, her disappearance. The narrative solidified quickly, shaped by assumptions that needed little encouragement. The cook became the center of a story larger than herself, a vessel into which Charleston poured its fear and outrage. The master visited once, standing rigidly across from her, his eyes searching her face as if for an explanation that would make sense of his loss. His voice shook as he spoke, anger and grief intertwined. He demanded to know how she could betray him, his household, his generosity. She met his gaze calmly. Whatever answer he sought did not exist in words he could hear. Word of the arrest spread, offering a grim sort of relief. The city exhaled, reassured that the threat had been contained, named, and confined. Churches filled that evening, sermons pivoting from celebration to warning. Ministers spoke of sin and temptation, of the dangers lurking beneath appearances. They framed the events as a test of faith rather than a mirror held too close. Among the enslaved community, the story traveled differently. It moved quietly, passed in fragments, careful not to draw attention. The cook's name was spoken with a mixture of awe and fear, her act interpreted through layers of shared understanding outsiders would never access. It was not celebrated openly, nor was it condemned. It existed as a fact, heavy and instructive, a reminder of the pressures that shaped their lives. The jail held her without ceremony, a stone cell with a narrow window that admitted more shadow than light. She sat on the hard bench, hands folded, listening to the city settle around her. Sounds drifted in, the call of vendors, the rumble of carts, the distant toll of bells marking hours that felt abstract now. Time moved differently here, stripped of routine and expectation. She slept little, not from fear but from awareness. The path ahead was clear in its inevitability. Charleston would demand closure, and closure required spectacle. She did not waste energy imagining outcomes. She had learned long ago that imagination was safest when kept close to reality. Oh, outside, preparations began for what would come next. Lawyers were consulted, charges drafted, narratives refined. The city rehearsed its lines, ensuring that when the moment arrived, the story would unfold smoothly, predictably. Disorder would be framed as an anomaly, quickly corrected. The deeper questions, the ones that threatened comfort, would remain unasked. As night fell again, the city's lights reflected off the harbor, steady and indifferent. Ships rocked gently, their crews unaware or unconcerned with the drama unfolding inland. Life, in its relentless way, continued. Within the jail, the cook closed her eyes and breathed evenly. The storm she had set in motion now belonged to others. What remained was waiting, and she had always been skilled at that. The trial unfolded as Charleston expected it would, swift and decisive, wrapped in the language of order and morality. The courtroom filled early, benches crowded with men and women who had dressed carefully as if appearance itself could restore what had been shattered. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that drifted lazily above a room, heavy with anticipation. The cook was brought in under guard, her steps measured, her posture straight. She wore plain clothing, clean and neatly arranged, offering no hint of the spectacle the city hoped to witness. From the moment she entered, the story no longer belonged to her. It had been shaped already, rehearsed in parlors and church pews, refined through rumor and fear. She was positioned as an aberration, a singular rupture in an otherwise orderly world. The prosecution spoke of betrayal, of trust violated, of the horror inflicted upon innocent guests gathered in celebration. Words like wickedness and depravity echoed against the walls, each one designed to narrow the narrative until it fit comfortably within the city's understanding of just. Ice. Witnesses were called, their testimonies carefully guided. Servants spoke of her skill, her authority in the kitchen, her knowledge of every dish that had passed through the house. Guests recounted the sudden illness, the confusion, the terror. Doctors described symptoms in clinical tones that nonetheless carried weight. Each account pointed inevitably toward her, tightening the circle of certainty. Context was unnecessary. Motivation was irrelevant. The act itself, stripped of everything that preceded it, was enough. When the cook was asked to speak, the room leaned forward collectively, hungry for confession or remorse. She did neither. Her voice, when she used it, was quiet and precise. She acknowledged her role in preparing the meal. She did not deny what had occurred. She did not explain why. The absence of justification unsettled the court more than any outburst might have. Silence in that space felt like defiance. The verdict came without surprise. The words were delivered formally, their finality ringing through the room. The city exhaled. Justice, it believed, had been served. Order would be restored. The cook listened without visible reaction, absorbing the sentence as she had absorbed so many commands before it. Years of discipline had trained her to receive outcomes without protest. Still, something shifted in the air, an unease that lingered even as people rose and filed out. The days that followed moved with grim efficiency. Preparations were made quietly, deliberately, as if haste itself might invite scrutiny. Newspapers reported the facts with restraint, careful not to dwell on discomforting details. The Christmas ball was referenced only obliquely, its elegance overshadowed by tragedy, but never interrogated. Charleston preferred its history polished, its edges smooth. On the morning chosen for judgment's final act, the city awoke early. LLS tolled softly, their sound drifting across streets damp with fog. A small crowd gathered, drawn by curiosity, obligation, or a need for reassurance. Officials stood ready, their expressions solemn. The cook was brought forward, her face calm, her gaze steady. There were murmurs, some sharp, some hushed. Prayers were whispered, hands clutched, eyes averted. She stood as she always had, composed and observant. The moment unfolded according to plan, efficient and public. When it was over, the crowd dispersed slowly, conversations low and uneasy. Some felt relief, others felt something closer to discomfort, though they struggled to name it. The city resumed its rhythm, eager to close the chapter. But stories do not end simply because a city wishes them to. Among the enslaved community, the cook's fate became something more than a cautionary tale. It was remembered in fragments, passed carefully from one person to another, shaped by shared understanding. Her silence at trial, her composure in the face of judgment, took on meaning that no official record could capture. She was not celebrated openly nor condemned. She was understood. The house on Church Street changed hands within a few years. New owners repainted walls, replaced furnishings, hosted gatherings of their own. The kitchen was scrubbed and rearranged, its past buried beneath fresh routines. Yet those who worked there felt it still, an unspoken awareness that lingered in the corners, in the careful way fires were tended and ingredients measured. The space remembered even if the city did not. Charleston continued to tell itself comforting stories about order and benevolence. The Christmas ball faded into legend, retold with softened edges. The cook's name was rarely spoken, and when it was, it carried only the weight of infamy, not the complexity of her life. Official history moved on, recording dates and outcomes while leaving the deeper truths untouched. Yet the river beyond the city flowed on, indifferent to verdicts and ceremonies. It carried whispers of labor and endurance, of lives shaped by forces rarely acknowledged. In its steady movement, there was a reminder that systems built on silence eventually confront the consequences of their own design. What happened in that kitchen was not an anomaly. It was a moment when the invisible became impossible to ignore. The legacy of that night lingered not in records, but in awareness, in the cautious glances exchanged when power spoke too loudly, in the understanding that obedience extracted through fear is never as secure as it appears. The cook's story endured because it revealed something uncomfortable, that beneath polished celebrations and public morality, there existed a world sustained by suffering, one that could not be contained forever. History often asks us to look away from such moments, to accept simplified explanations that preserve comfort. But buried stories resist erasure. They surface in unexpected ways, challenging us to consider not just what happened, but why. The cook of Charleston was judged swiftly, her fate sealed by a society unwilling to confront its own reflection. Yet the questions her story raises remain unanswered, echoing through time. The true mystery was never how the poisoning occurred, or even who carried it out. It was how a city so devoted to order failed to recognize the conditions that made such an act conceivable. That failure, more than any single crime, was Charleston's deepest wound. And it is there, in that unresolved space between justice and understanding, that the story continues to speak. This story reminds us that history often remembers outcomes while forgetting origins. The tragedy of the Christmas ball was not born in a single night, but in years of silence, exploitation, and unacknowledged humanity. When suffering is ignored long enough, it finds a way to be seen, often in forms that shock those who believe themselves untouched. To confront these stories honestly is not to excuse violence, but to understand the systems that produce it, and to recognize the human cost hidden behind polished traditions. Thank you for watching Buried Stories, where we uncover the forgotten, uncomfortable, and often hidden chapters of American history. If this story moved you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment with your thoughts, and share it with others who value deeper historical truth. Stay connected with us, and feel free to reach out if there's another untold story you believe deserves a voice. Here at Buried Stories, we believe history isn't just about the past, it's about understanding the present through what was buried and left behind.